You can tell a lot about a town by who they point their rifles at before sunrise. At 5:12 in the morning, the dirt road outside Elijah Turner's farm looked less like rural Alabama and more like the edge of a military checkpoint. Red and blue lights flashed through the pine trees in long silent streaks, bouncing across rusted fence posts and muddy tire tracks still wet from last night's rain. More than 50 police vehicles lined both sides of the narrow county road, engines humming low in the cold dawn air while officers in tactical vests moved through the fog with radios crackling against their shoulders. A black surveillance drone circled slowly above the farmhouse roof, its tiny blinking light reflecting off puddles in the yard. Half the town had already gathered behind the barricades with phones raised high, whispering to each other like they were waiting to witness something dangerous. "That him?" one deputy asked quietly while adjusting the strap of his rifle. Another officer looked through binoculars toward the barn nearly 80 yards away. "Yeah," he muttered. "Big black male. Late 50s maybe. Possible weapon stockpile." Near the back of the crowd, somebody laughed under their breath. "Man looks too fat to run anyway." A few people chuckled. Nobody noticed the young rookie officer standing near the SWAT truck stop smiling after he saw the old man for the first time. Elijah Turner was standing beside a chicken coop wearing faded denim overalls and thick brown work gloves, scattering feed across the wet dirt while 6 chickens pecked around his boots. He moved slowly, favoring one knee every few steps, his broad frame heavy with age and labor instead of laziness. His gray beard caught the pale morning light while steam rose from a cup of coffee balanced on the fence beside him. From a distance, he looked exactly like the kind of man nobody paid attention to. Just another old black farmer in a forgotten county where people drove past without ever learning his name. Captain Wade Collins lowered the binoculars from his eyes and stared hard at the farmhouse. "Everybody stays sharp," he ordered. "We don't know what he's capable of." Collins was tall, clean-shaven, and stiff in the shoulders like a man who enjoyed being obeyed. The silver badge on his chest gleamed every time police lights flashed across him. He had arrived 2 hours earlier after receiving an anonymous tip claiming Elijah Turner was storing illegal military-grade weapons on his property and threatening federal officers online. By the time the call reached County Dispatch, rumors had already spread through town that the old farmer was some kind of anti-government extremist preparing for a violent standoff. Nobody questioned it. In towns like this, fear moved faster than facts. Collins stepped beside the armored vehicle parked near the entrance gate and keyed his radio. "Sniper team, status." A voice answered immediately. "Target visible. No active threat detected." Collins narrowed his eyes again toward Elijah. "Keep sights trained anyway." Behind him, a local reporter whispered into a microphone while cameras rolled. "Authorities have surrounded a rural property connected to a potentially dangerous suspect this morning." Her voice faded beneath the growing hum of conversation from the crowd. Some people looked nervous. Others looked entertained. One teenage boy lifted his phone higher and zoomed in toward Elijah's face. "Yo," he laughed softly to his friend, dude doesn't even know he's surrounded. But Elijah Turner already knew. The moment the first cruiser rolled onto the dirt road nearly 30 minutes earlier, he had noticed the birds stop singing near the tree line. Then came the vibration beneath the ground from heavy engines. Then the smell of diesel floating through the cold air. Years ago, those details had meant survival. Now they simply made him tired. Elijah slowly set the empty feed bucket down beside the coop and glanced toward the woods where officers hid behind patrol vehicles. His expression did not change. He neither panicked nor hurried. That calmness unsettled the rookie officer watching from behind the barricade. Most innocent people looked confused during police raids. Most guilty people looked afraid. Elijah looked neither. He looked like a man watching a storm he had already survived once before. Collins noticed the same thing. "Why's he so calm?" one deputy asked quietly. Collins answered without hesitation. "Because men like that always think they're smarter than everybody else." The captain stepped forward toward a loudspeaker mounted on the armored truck. Rainwater dripped from pine branches overhead while the early morning wind carried the smell of wet soil and livestock across the property. Somewhere in the distance, a horse kicked softly against a wooden stall. Collins lifted the microphone. "Elijah Turner!" His voice thundered across the farm. The chickens scattered instantly. "Step away from the barn and keep your hands where officers can see them." The entire property fell silent except for the faint crackling of police radios. Elijah stood still beside the fence for a moment, staring out across the rows of flashing vehicles now surrounding his land. Then slowly, carefully, he removed one glove finger by finger and placed it on the wooden post beside his coffee cup. A cold gust of wind moved across the field, rustling the tall grass around his boots. The rookie officer swallowed hard without understanding why his chest suddenly felt tight. Elijah raised both hands calmly into the air and looked directly toward the line of armed officers. "Morning, officers," he called out in a deep, weathered voice. "Just don't scare my horses." The cold wind carried the smell of wet hay and diesel fuel across Elijah Turner's property while dozens of officers watched him with their fingers resting near holsters and rifle straps. Elijah remained still beside the chicken coop, both hands raised calmly in the grey morning light as if he had already accepted that nobody there truly saw him as a man. To them, he was a problem to control before breakfast. Captain Wade Collins stepped through the muddy entrance gate with two deputies following closely behind him. Their boots sank into the soaked dirt with every step. Collins stopped about 20 feet away from Elijah and studied him carefully for the first time without binoculars. Up close, Elijah looked older than expected. Deep lines cut across his forehead. His beard carried more grey than black now. His shoulders were massive beneath the faded denim overalls, but age and hard labor had bent them slightly forward. Rainwater dripped slowly from the brim of his old brown cap. Collins glanced toward the farmhouse porch where an American flag hung from a rusted pole beside wind chimes moving softly in the breeze. The place looked poor, quiet, ordinary. That almost annoyed him more. "You Elijah Turner?" Collins asked. Elijah nodded once. "Been Elijah Turner for 58 years. A few deputies smirked behind the captain. Collins did not. "We received reports of illegal weapons and threats made against law enforcement. You understand why we are here?" Elijah lowered his eyes briefly toward the muddy ground before answering. "No, sir. I do not." His voice remained calm, deep, almost tired. Collins hated that tone immediately. It sounded too steady for a man surrounded by 50 armed officers. "You live alone here?" Collins asked. "Just me and the animals. Anybody else on the property?" "No, sir." Collins studied him another moment before motioning toward the farmhouse. "We are going to search the buildings." Elijah finally looked directly at him then. "Not angry. Not scared. Just quiet. You got a warrant?" Several officers exchanged looks. Collins reached into his vest pocket and unfolded papers without taking his eyes off Elijah. "Signed 3 hours ago." Elijah stared at the documents from a distance but did not move closer. The rookie officer standing near the armored truck noticed something strange then. Elijah's eyes scanned the perimeter in less than 2 seconds. Roof lines. Tree line. Vehicle spacing. Officer positions. Entry angles. It happened so fast most people would not notice. But the rookie had spent 2 years in the Marines before joining county police. He recognized tactical awareness when he saw it. Elijah was mapping the entire scene in his head. Collins folded the warrant back into his pocket. "You carrying any weapons right now?" "Pocket knife," Elijah answered honestly. "Use it for feed bags." One deputy quickly stepped forward and removed the old folding knife from Elijah's overalls. The handle was worn smooth from years of use. Nothing about it looked threatening. Collins glanced toward the farmhouse again. Search team move in. Within seconds, officers spread across the property. Boots stomped through puddles while radios crackled beneath the growing sound of rain tapping against barn roofs. One deputy pushed open the gate to the horse stable while another headed toward the equipment shed. Elijah watched all of it silently. "Easy with the chestnut mare," he said quietly. "She scares easy around loud noises." Nobody answered him. Near the road, more townspeople had gathered behind police tape. Some stood in pajama pants holding coffee cups while others live-streamed from their phones. Elijah could hear their voices drifting through the damp air. "I heard he threatened federal agents. No way a guy like that lives out here alone unless something is wrong with him. Probably one of those militia people." A woman near the barricade shook her head slowly while staring at Elijah. "Poor animal's probably been living with a crazy man." Elijah heard every word. His face never changed. Collins walked beside him toward the porch steps. "How long you owned this place?" "Almost 12 years. What did you do before farming?" Elijah paused for half a second. "Worked overseas." Collins gave a dry smile. "Doing what?" Elijah looked toward the tree line instead of answering immediately. The wind shifted through the pines, carrying the faint creak of old fence wire somewhere behind the barn. "Government work," he finally said. One deputy laughed quietly behind Collins. "Yeah, right." Collins folded his arms. "You expecting us to believe that?" Elijah shrugged gently. "Believe whatever helps you sleep." That answer irritated Collins more than open disrespect would have. The captain stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen carefully. Men who hide weapons and threaten officers usually think they are smarter than everybody else. This ends easier if you cooperate." Elijah looked at him for several long seconds before speaking. "Captain, if I wanted trouble, your people would not still be standing relaxed near my east fence." Silence spread instantly between the officers. The rookie felt his stomach tighten. Collins narrowed his eyes sharply. "Was that a threat?" Elijah slowly shook his head. "No, sir. Just an observation." Somewhere near the barn, a deputy suddenly called out over the radio. "Captain, you might want to see this." Collins turned immediately toward the equipment shed while officers nearby stiffened with renewed tension. Elijah remained standing beside the porch in the falling rain, breathing slowly while cold water rolled from the edge of his cap onto the dirt below him. The old wind chimes beside the farmhouse clinked softly in the silence, and for the first time that morning, the rookie officer realized something that made his chest uneasy. Elijah Turner did not look like a man waiting to be rescued. He looked like a man remembering something he had spent years trying to forget. The deputy standing inside the equipment shed sounded less confident the second time he called over the radio. "Captain, you need to come look at this now." Rain tapped steadily against the tin roof while Captain Wade Collins pushed past stacked hay bales and rusted gardening tools toward the back wall of the shed. Flashlight swept through the dim interior, beams cutting across dust floating in the cold air. Elijah remained outside near the porch under watch from four-armed officers, his large frame motionless beneath the falling rain. The rookie officer could still feel those strange words lingering in his mind. "If I wanted trouble, your people would not still be standing relaxed near my east fence." It did not sound like bragging. It sounded like fact. Collins stepped deeper into the shed and stopped suddenly. The room looked ordinary at first glance. Old fuel cans. Horse feed. Coiled rope hanging from nails. But the far wall had been organized with almost unnatural precision. Every tool hung perfectly aligned. Shelves were spaced evenly down to the inch. A large hand-drawn map of the property sat pinned beside a workbench with markings around tree lines, drainage paths, and elevation points. One deputy pointed toward the ceiling corner. "Sir, there are cameras." Collins looked up sharply. Tiny security cameras blended almost invisibly into the wooden beams overhead. Another deputy opened a steel cabinet nearby and pulled out weatherproof batteries, emergency radios, medical kits, and neatly labeled supply containers. "This is not normal farm equipment," the deputy muttered. Collins slowly walked toward the workbench. His jaw tightened as he examined the map more closely. Red circles marked blind spots around the property. Wind direction notes were written in black marker beside distances measured in yards. Entry routes were labeled with military shorthand. The rookie officer stepped quietly into the shed behind them and immediately recognized the layout. Defensive positioning. Observation lines. Controlled movement corridors. Somebody had trained here for years. "I told you," Collins said coldly. "This guy is dangerous." The rookie hesitated. "Or disciplined?" Collins turned sharply toward him. "What was that?" "Nothing, sir." Another officer opened a wooden crate beneath the table. Instead of weapons, he found sealed bags of livestock medicine, canned food, flashlights, and emergency blankets stacked carefully inside. "Looks more like disaster prep supplies," the deputy said uncertainly. Collins ignored him. His attention had shifted toward a faded photograph resting face down near the edge of the workbench. He picked it up slowly. The picture showed a much younger Elijah standing beside 6 men in desert uniforms somewhere overseas. Their faces were sunburned, exhausted, smiling. One man had his arm around Elijah's shoulders. The image had been folded and repaired with clear tape several times. Collins flipped it over. No names. No dates. Only a handwritten sentence in faded black ink. "Brothers do not leave brothers behind." The captain tossed the photo back onto the table. Could all be fake. Outside, thunder rolled low across the Alabama sky while rain thickened into a steady curtain over the farm. Elijah stood beneath the porch roof now, hands lowered but still surrounded by deputies. One of the horses inside the stable stomped nervously against wood while the old wind chimes clinked softly beside the front door. A younger deputy approached Elijah cautiously. "How long you been living out here?" Elijah kept his eyes on the rain falling across the field. "Long. Enough. People in town say you mostly keep to yourself." Elijah nodded faintly. "Town mostly likes it that way." The deputy shifted awkwardly. "You military or something?" Before Elijah could answer, another officer nearby interrupted with a laugh. "Come on, man. You really buying that story?" Several deputies smirked. "Guy probably watched too many action movies." Elijah said nothing. The silence somehow made the joke die faster. Back inside the shed, Collins opened another cabinet and froze briefly. Hanging neatly inside was an old dark blue jacket sealed in protective plastic. On the chest sat a faded military patch partially covered by age. The lettering beneath it had almost worn away completely. Collins pulled the jacket free while deputies crowded closer. "This has to be stolen," one officer whispered. The rookie stepped closer and felt his stomach tighten again. He recognized the insignia immediately even before reading the weathered embroidery beneath it. Naval Special Warfare. Collins noticed the rookie's expression. "You know something." The young officer hesitated. "Only special operations units use shorthand markings like the ones on that map." Collins scoffed loudly. "So what? Maybe he is pretending." The rookie looked around the shed once more. The precision. The discipline. The calm. None of it felt fake. Outside, Elijah slowly sat down in the old rocking chair beside the porch without asking permission. Rainwater rolled off the roof inches from his boots while he stared across the muddy field toward the distant tree line. His face remained unreadable, but exhaustion rested deep inside his eyes now. One deputy noticed several scars crossing Elijah's massive hands. Another saw the faint limp when he shifted his left leg. The rookie watched him carefully from the shed doorway and realized something else. Elijah never once looked at the rifles pointed near him. Most people would not stop staring at guns aimed their direction. Elijah barely acknowledged them at all. Like he had lived around weapons so long they no longer registered as danger. Collins stepped back outside carrying the military jacket in one hand. He held it up toward Elijah. "You want to explain this?" Elijah looked at the jacket for several quiet seconds before answering. "Been looking for that." Collins narrowed his eyes. "You expecting us to believe you earned this?" Elijah slowly leaned back in the rocking chair as thunder echoed far away across the clouds. "No, sir," he said softly. "People usually decide what they believe about me long before they ask questions." For a moment, nobody spoke. The rain kept falling. The drone continued circling overhead. Somewhere behind the stable, one lonely dog barked once into the grey morning air before everything went silent again. The rain grew heavier over the farm, turning the dirt road into dark brown sludge while police lights flashed across puddles like broken pieces of red and blue glass. Captain Wade Collins stood beneath the porch roof holding the old military jacket in one hand, his jaw tight with irritation as deputies moved in and out of the farmhouse carrying boxes, papers, and supply bins. Elijah Turner remained seated in the weathered rocking chair beside the front door, watching them quietly with both hands resting on his knees. He did not argue. He did not beg. That calmness unsettled more people by the minute. A deputy stepped onto the porch carrying a metal lockbox. "Found this under the bed." Collins immediately grabbed it and tried the latch. "Locked." "Open it," he ordered. Elijah looked toward the box for a long moment before answering. "That one holds personal things." Collins stared at him coldly. "Open it anyway." Elijah slowly pushed himself out of the rocking chair with visible stiffness in his bad knee. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the roof inches from his boots while two deputies instinctively placed their hands near their holsters. Elijah noticed. His eyes lowered briefly toward their fingers before returning to the lockbox. "Easy," he said softly. "I am not reaching for anything except the key." Collins nodded sharply. Elijah reached carefully into his front pocket and handed over a small brass key worn smooth with age. Collins unlocked the box himself while several officers leaned closer under the porch light. Inside sat carefully folded letters tied together. With faded blue ribbon, several old photographs, military challenge coins, and a triangular American flag sealed in clear plastic. Nobody spoke at first. One deputy picked up a photograph showing a younger Elijah standing beside a helicopter somewhere overseas. The man in the picture looked leaner then, stronger, but the eyes were exactly the same. Calm. Focused. Tired in a way civilians rarely understood. "Where was this taken?" the rookie officer asked quietly. Elijah answered without looking up. "Afghanistan." Collins scoffed under his breath. "Anybody can say that." He reached deeper into the box and pulled out another object wrapped carefully in cloth. When he unfolded it, a bronze medal attached to faded ribbon rested in his hand. The porch grew strangely quiet. Even the deputies nearest the steps leaned closer trying to read the engraving through the rain. Collins turned the medal over slowly. "You expect us to believe this belongs to you too?" Elijah looked at the medal with an expression that almost resembled regret. "No, sir," he said quietly. "I expect you already made up your mind before you got here." That answer hit harder than anyone expected. Collins immediately handed the medal back to a deputy like the object irritated him somehow. "Search the rest of the house." Officers moved deeper into the farmhouse while wet boots tracked mud across old wooden floors. The inside smelled faintly of coffee, cedar wood, and old books. Everything was modest but spotless. Shelves lined the living room walls filled with farming manuals, history books, and worn paperbacks with cracked spines. A small Bible rested beside a recliner near the fireplace. Another deputy opened the refrigerator and frowned. "This old man barely has enough food for himself." Nearby, the rookie officer noticed dozens of handwritten envelopes stacked neatly beside the kitchen counter. Most were addressed to local families around the county. "What are these?" he asked. Elijah glanced toward the envelopes from the porch. "Food deliveries." "You deliver food?" Elijah nodded faintly. "Some folks around here got it harder than me." The rookie picked up one envelope and read a child's handwriting on the front. "Thank you, Mr. Turner, for the vegetables and the blankets. My mom cried when you brought them." The young officer slowly lowered the envelope without speaking. Outside near the barricades, the crowd continued growing despite the rain. Rumors spread faster with every passing minute. Some people claimed Elijah had hidden weapons underground. Others claimed federal agents were involved. A man wearing a hunting jacket pointed toward the farmhouse while speaking loudly enough for deputies to hear. I knew something was off about him. Nobody keeps to themselves that much unless they're hiding something. Nearby, an older black woman standing beneath an umbrella shook her head slowly. That man fixed my roof after the tornado last year, she said quietly. Never charged me $1. Nobody answered her. Inside the stable, one of Elijah's horses suddenly became restless as officers searched nearby stalls with flashlights. The animal stomped nervously against the wooden floor while thunder echoed again through the gray Alabama sky. Elijah immediately stood up from the rocking chair despite the deputies watching him closely. The mayor does not like shouting, he said. Collins blocked his path instantly. Stay where you are. Elijah stopped. The horse kicked harder inside the stall. Captain, Elijah said calmly, if she panics in that corner, somebody is getting hurt. Collins hesitated only briefly before nodding toward a deputy. Go with him. Elijah walked slowly across the muddy yard beside the young deputy while rain soaked through his overalls. The rookie officer watched carefully as Elijah approached the stable. The moment the old farmer entered, the horse calmed almost immediately. Elijah rested one large hand gently against the mare's neck and spoke softly under his breath. The deputy standing nearby looked genuinely confused. How did you do that? Elijah gave a tired half smile. Animals know when somebody comes carrying fear. The deputy glanced awkwardly toward the armed officers outside. Elijah slowly brushed rainwater from the horse's mane. People usually do too. Back near the porch, Captain Collins stared toward the stable with growing frustration. Every minute on that farm made the situation feel less clear instead of more dangerous. Yet something about Elijah still bothered him deeply. Maybe it was the military precision hidden beneath the quiet farmer routine. Maybe it was the way his deputies were slowly lowering their guard around him. Or maybe it was the simple fact that the old black man everyone expected to break down under pressure refused to give them the reaction they came looking for. By late morning the rain had turned the entire farm into a field of shallow puddles and dark mud, but nobody had left. The crowd beyond the barricades had doubled in size. More reporters arrived with cameras wrapped in plastic while patrol lights continued flashing against the gray sky. The operation that was supposed to expose a dangerous suspect had somehow become stranger with every passing hour. Captain Wade Collins stood inside the farmhouse kitchen studying papers spread across the table while frustration slowly sharpened every line in his face. There were no illegal weapons. No threats. No evidence of extremist activity. Only military discipline, emergency supplies, and an old black farmer who refused to react the way everyone expected him to. One deputy stepped into the kitchen holding a stack of folders recovered from a bedroom closet. You should see these. Collins grabbed the folders immediately and flipped them open. Inside were medical records, military discharge paperwork, therapy evaluations, and faded documents stamped with government seals. Several pages had blacked out sections impossible to read. Collins scanned quickly until one line caught his attention. Naval Special Warfare Command. His expression hardened. This could still be fake. The rookie officer standing nearby frowned slightly. Sir, forging federal military documents like that would be serious. Collins looked up sharply. You defending him now? No, sir. But the hesitation in the rookie's voice answered the question anyway. Across the house, deputies continued opening drawers and cabinets while Elijah sat silently at the kitchen table under supervision. He had not touched the cup of coffee cooling near his elbow in over an hour. Rain tapped steadily against the windows while muddy footprints covered the floorboards around him. One deputy opened a hallway closet and suddenly called out, "Captain!" Collins walked over immediately. Inside the closet stood several heavy plastic storage bins stacked neatly to the ceiling. Collins opened the first one expecting weapons. Instead he found folded blankets, canned soup, bottled water, and children's winter coats sorted carefully by size. Another bin contained school supplies still wrapped in packaging. "What is all this?" a deputy asked. Elijah answered quietly from the kitchen. "Storm relief supplies." Collins looked over his shoulder. "For what?" Elijah rubbed one tired hand across his beard before speaking. "Tornado season." The rookie officer opened another bin and found handwritten index cards attached to each supply package with family names and addresses around the county. "You distribute this yourself?" Elijah nodded faintly. "Churches help sometimes." The kitchen grew uncomfortable after that. Deputies who arrived expecting danger now stood surrounded by evidence of quiet generosity instead. Collins seemed to feel the shift happening around him, and it only made him colder. He stepped back into the kitchen holding the military paperwork in one hand. "Funny thing about men pretending to be heroes," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "They usually surround themselves with props." Elijah slowly lifted his eyes toward him. "Maybe." Collins tossed the paperwork onto the table. "You think these old medals and jackets make people respect you?" Elijah looked down at the scattered papers without touching them. Respect was never the goal. Then what was? Elijah answered after a long silence. "Peace." Nobody expected that word. Especially not Collins. The captain let out a short bitter laugh. "Peace? You got 50 officers on your property because somebody reported military activity and surveillance systems all over this farm." Elijah nodded once. "Because I learned a long time ago that danger usually comes before sunrise." The room fell still again. The rookie officer quietly looked toward the windows. He suddenly realized Elijah had probably not slept peacefully in years. Outside near the stable, one of the deputies searching the back pasture accidentally backed a patrol truck too close to the animal fencing. The loud engine noise startled Elijah's chestnut mare again. The horse panicked, pulling violently against the gate while officers shouted over each other in confusion. Elijah stood up immediately from the kitchen table. "Open the stable door," he said firmly. Collins stepped directly into his path. "Sit back down." Elijah's expression changed for the first time all morning. Not anger. Concern. Real concern. "Captain, she is going to hurt herself." Collins folded his arms stubbornly. Deputies can handle a horse. But outside the shouting only grew louder. The horse slammed hard against the wooden stall while rainwater sprayed through the open stable entrance. Several officers backed away uncertainly. Elijah looked past Collins toward the window. Every muscle in his body seemed tense now. "Please," he said quietly. That single word sounded heavier than anything else he had spoken all day. Collins hesitated too long. Elijah finally stepped around him despite two deputies instantly moving closer. "I am helping the horse," he said calmly. "Nothing else." The rookie officer looked toward Collins. "Sir, let him." Collins clenched his jaw but finally nodded once. Elijah moved quickly despite his limp, crossing the muddy yard through the rain while deputies followed several feet behind him. The moment he entered the stable, his voice dropped low and calm beneath the sound of thunder outside. Nobody could hear exactly what he said to the frightened animal, but within seconds the horse stopped fighting the gate. Elijah rested both hands gently along the mare's neck while rain dripped from his sleeves onto the straw-covered floor. The stable slowly became quiet except for the horse's breathing. One deputy watching nearby shook his head in disbelief. "How does he do that?" The rookie answered softly without taking his eyes off Elijah. "Because fear listens to calm." Outside the stable entrance, Captain Collins stood in the rain watching the scene with growing unease. Every instinct told him the old farmer was hiding something. But every fact uncovered so far pointed toward a man carrying discipline instead of danger. And deep down beneath his pride, Collins had started realizing something he hated admitting even to himself. The person everyone came expecting to control had quietly become the calmest man on the entire property. By early afternoon the storm finally began to weaken, but thick gray clouds still hung low over Elijah Turner's farm like heavy smoke refusing to move on. Rainwater dripped steadily from the barn roof while muddy tire tracks cut deep scars through the soaked ground around the property. Most of the crowd beyond the barricades had gone quiet now. The excitement was fading, replaced by confusion. No weapons had been found. No threats uncovered. Just an old black farmer with military paperwork, emergency supplies, and a silence that seemed to make everyone around him uncomfortable. Elijah sat alone on the front porch again, wrapped in a faded brown work jacket someone had finally allowed him to retrieve from inside the house. Steam rose from a fresh cup of coffee resting between his large weathered hands while officers moved more slowly across the property than before. The aggressive energy from sunrise had drained away hour by hour, leaving only exhaustion behind. Captain Wade Collins stood near the patrol truck speaking quietly with county officials over the radio, but even from a distance the frustration in his posture was obvious. The operation had become a problem now. Cameras were everywhere. Reporters kept asking questions. And the dangerous man they expected to expose looked more like the calmest person in the county. The rookie officer walked slowly onto the porch carrying a small paper bag from the convenience store down the road. He hesitated before sitting carefully on the opposite end of the wooden steps. "Turkey sandwich," he said awkwardly. It was all they had left. Elijah looked at the bag for a moment before giving a tired nod. "Appreciate it." The rookie handed it over. Up close he noticed again how rough Elijah's hands looked. Thick scars crossed the knuckles. Old burn marks faded into the skin near his wrists. The kind of hands built by hard years instead of comfort. Elijah opened the sandwich quietly while the wind pushed cool rain mist across the porch. "You were military before law enforcement?" Elijah asked without looking up. The rookie seemed surprised. "How did you know?" Elijah took a slow sip of coffee. "You stand with your shoulders square to every doorway." The rookie laughed softly under his breath. "Marine Corps. 2 years." Elijah nodded once. "You still wake up before sunrise?" The young officer looked away toward the muddy field. "Every day." Neither man spoke after that for a while. The silence between them felt strangely peaceful compared to the tension everywhere else on the farm. Wind moved softly through the trees while distant thunder rolled far away toward the hills. Somewhere inside the stable, one of the horses snorted quietly against the wooden stall. Finally the rookie glanced toward Elijah again. "Did you really serve overseas?" Elijah unwrapped the sandwich carefully before answering. "Long time ago." "Special operations?" Elijah chewed slowly, staring out toward the rain-covered pasture. "Some memories are better left where they happened." The rookie lowered his eyes. He understood that answer more than he expected. Inside the farmhouse, deputies had mostly stopped searching. Some quietly repacked boxes they had dumped onto tables earlier. Others avoided eye contact with Elijah entirely whenever they stepped onto the porch. One deputy even wiped mud from the kitchen floor without being asked. The energy had shifted. Nobody said it out loud, but more and more officers no longer believed they were standing on the property of a dangerous man. Captain Collins still did. Or at least he forced himself to. The captain climbed the porch steps carrying a folder beneath one arm. Water dripped from his jacket sleeves while tension pulled hard across his face. "Federal Records Office is taking forever verifying these documents," he muttered. Elijah remained calm. "Government moves slow." Collins stared at him sharply. "You seem very relaxed for somebody under investigation." Elijah gave a faint tired shrug. "I spent years waiting for people to decide whether I mattered enough to come home alive. Waiting never bothered me much after that." Collins said nothing. The rookie officer looked down at the wooden porch boards, suddenly feeling like he should not be hearing this conversation. Wind chimes hanging beside the front door clinked softly in the cool afternoon breeze. Elijah slowly leaned back in the rocking chair, one large hand wrapped around the warm coffee cup. His eyes looked distant now, somewhere far beyond the rain and patrol cars and muddy Alabama field. "You know the funny thing. Elijah said quietly after a while. Neither officer answered. Most people think coming home from war feels loud. Parades. Flags. Music. He shook his head slowly. But for a lot of us, it is mostly silence. The rookie swallowed hard. Collins remained standing stiff near the porch railing, but his expression softened for the first time all day. Elijah looked down at the coffee in his hands. 1 minute everybody tells you that you matter. Then a few years later people only see an old black man on a farm. Rainwater dripped steadily from the roof beside him. Sometimes they do not even see the man part. The porch fell completely silent after that. Even Collins had no immediate response. Somewhere behind the property, a police radio crackled faintly through the damp air before fading again into static. Elijah took another slow sip of coffee while the storm clouds finally began breaking apart overhead. Thin beams of afternoon sunlight pushed through the grey sky, reflecting softly across puddles scattered through the field. The rookie officer noticed something then that stayed with him for years afterward. Elijah Turner looked exhausted in a way sleep could never fix. Not weak. Not defeated. Just tired deep inside his bones. Like a man who had spent half his life protecting people who still looked at him with suspicion the moment uniforms disappeared. The first ray of sunlight finally broke through the storm clouds at 3:47 in the afternoon, casting pale gold light across Elijah Turner's soaked pasture while officers slowly packed equipment back into patrol trucks. The operation had stretched. Nearly 10 hours, and exhaustion hung over the property heavier than the rain ever had. Reporters still lingered near the barricades hoping for something dramatic to justify the cameras and headlines, but most of the excitement had vanished hours ago. Deputies now moved carefully around the farm instead of storming through it. Some even nodded politely toward Elijah when passing the porch. Captain Wade Collins hated every second of that change. He stood near the armored vehicle staring at the farmhouse with growing frustration while dispatch chatter crackled faintly through the radio clipped to his shoulder. Nothing made sense anymore. The anonymous tip had sounded urgent. Federal involvement had been implied. Tactical preparation on the property had seemed undeniable. Yet the old black farmer sitting quietly on the porch now looked more like a tired veteran than a threat. Collins rubbed one hand across his face before keying his radio again. County Dispatch, any update from federal records? Static answered first. Then finally a voice came through. Still waiting on confirmation from Washington. Collins muttered under his breath and turned away. Nearby, the rookie officer sat on an overturned feed bucket beside the stable watching Elijah from a distance. The old man had not moved much for nearly an hour. He simply sat in the rocking chair with both hands folded together while sunlight slowly dried the rainwater across the porch steps. The horses had calmed. The wind had softened. Even the drone overhead had finally been grounded. For the first time all day, the farm felt like a home again instead of a battlefield waiting to happen. Then suddenly every radio on the property crackled at once. Deputies instinctively looked down toward their belts. Collins immediately grabbed his shoulder. "MIC, this is Captain Collins." The voice answering was not local dispatch. It was sharp, direct, unmistakably federal. Captain Wade Collins. Collins straightened immediately. "Yes, sir." "Stand by for priority verification regarding Elijah Marcus Turner." The rookie officer looked up sharply from beside the stable. Several nearby deputies exchanged confused glances. Even reporters beyond the barricades noticed the sudden shift in body language among officers. Collins walked several steps away from the crowd while listening carefully. The federal voice continued. "You are currently conducting an active investigation involving retired Master Chief Special Warfare Operator Elijah Turner. Is that correct?" Collins felt his stomach tighten slightly. "That is correct." A long pause followed. Then came words that drained the color from his face. "Captain, you are instructed to cease all aggressive operational activity immediately." Collins blinked hard. "So, Master Chief Turner served 23 years under Naval Special Warfare Command. Multiple overseas deployments. Silver Star recipient. Bronze Star recipient. Several commendations remain classified. The world around Collins suddenly felt very quiet. Wind moved softly through the trees while distant radios crackled across the property. The federal voice continued calmly. You are also advised that Mr. Turner participated in joint operations protecting American diplomatic personnel during the Benghazi evacuation period. Collins swallowed hard. There must be some mistake. There is no mistake. Another pause. Captain, do you understand who is sitting on that porch? Collins slowly looked toward Elijah. The old farmer remained seated exactly where he had been for the last hour, sunlight resting softly across his weathered face while steam rose from another cup of coffee beside him. He did not appear dangerous. He did not appear proud. He looked tired. Deeply tired. The federal official spoke again, slower this time. Several men are alive today because Elijah Turner carried them home himself. Collins could not answer. His grip tightened around the radio until his knuckles turned pale. One final note, the voice added quietly. You may want to reconsider how your department handled this situation. Master Chief Turner filed no complaints after previous incidents involving local harassment despite multiple recommendations from federal veterans advocates. Collins felt something cold settle heavily in his chest. Previous incidents. That meant this was not the first time people had targeted Elijah. Not the first time uniforms arrived assuming the worst because an old black man lived quietly and differently outside town limits. The radio clicked silent. Collins lowered his hand slowly while the afternoon wind rustled across the soaked pasture around him. Nearby deputies watched his expression change in real time. Captain, one officer asked cautiously. Collins did not answer immediately. He simply stared toward the porch where Elijah remained rocking gently back and forth in the fading sunlight. The rookie officer stood up slowly from beside the stable. Sir, what did they say? Collins finally spoke, but his voice sounded weaker than before. He is real. The rookie looked toward Elijah again, suddenly understanding why the old man carried himself the way he did. The awareness. The calm. The silence. None of it had been performance. It had been survival shaped into discipline over decades nobody there could fully imagine. Reporters beyond the barricades noticed officers lowering their heads toward each other in stunned conversation. Cameras immediately pointed toward the farmhouse again. One deputy quietly removed his baseball cap out of respect without even realizing he had done it. Captain Collins remained frozen near the patrol trucks for several long seconds before slowly walking toward the porch alone. Mud clung heavily to his boots now. The same boots that marched confidently onto the property that morning. But each step toward Elijah suddenly felt different than before. Smaller somehow. Human. Elijah looked up as Collins approached. Sunlight reflected softly through the wet trees behind him while the old wind chimes beside the front door moved gently in the breeze. Collins stopped at the bottom step of the porch and stared at the man he had spent all day treating like a threat. Elijah studied his face quietly for a moment before speaking in the same calm voice he had carried since sunrise. Looks like they finally answered your questions, Captain. Captain Wade Collins stood motionless at the bottom of the porch steps while late afternoon sunlight spread slowly across the soaked Alabama field behind him. The storm clouds were finally breaking apart overhead, leaving streaks of pale orange drifting through the western sky. Around the property, deputies had stopped pretending to search for danger. Most now moved quietly between patrol vehicles gathering equipment and avoiding eye contact with the old man they had surrounded since sunrise. Reporters whispered urgently into microphones beyond the barricades after hearing rumors about federal confirmation. The energy had changed completely. Hours earlier the farm felt like the center of a criminal investigation. Now it felt like the scene of a mistake nobody knew how to undo. Elijah Turner remained seated in the old rocking chair beside the front door, both hands folded over his coffee cup while the porch boards creaked softly beneath him. His expression stayed calm despite everything. No anger. No satisfaction. just the same tired patience he had carried all day. Collins removed his cap slowly, holding it awkwardly against his side. Mud covered the lower half of his uniform now. Rain had dried stiff across his sleeves. For the first time since arriving that morning, he looked less like a commanding officer and more like a man trying to figure out how he had become the wrong person in his own story. Several deputies nearby quietly stopped what they were doing to watch. Even the rookie officer remained still beside the stable entrance. Nobody spoke. Wind moved softly through the trees while distant cicadas began singing after the rain. Collins cleared his throat once before finally speaking. The records came back. Elijah nodded faintly. I figured they would eventually. Collins looked down briefly at the porch steps beneath his boots. Everything checked out. Elijah said nothing. That silence somehow made the moment heavier. Collins slowly lifted his eyes again. You served 23 years. Yes, sir. Silver Star. That is what they called it. Collins swallowed hard. Why did you never tell anybody around here? Elijah looked out toward the field instead of answering immediately. Golden sunlight reflected across puddles left by the storm while one of the horses shifted quietly inside the stable behind him. People hear what they already decided to hear, he said softly. After a while you stop explaining yourself. The words landed harder than Collins expected. Behind him, a few deputies lowered their heads uncomfortably. They all remembered the jokes from earlier that morning. The comments. The assumptions. The way they looked at Elijah before knowing who he was. Collins glanced toward the farmhouse windows where muddy footprints still covered the floors inside. Cabinets remained open. Personal belongings sat disturbed across tables and counters. An entire day of suspicion had been dragged through the old man's home. Mr. Turner, Collins stopped speaking for a moment as if the next words physically hurt to say. Elijah? I owe you an apology. Elijah finally looked directly at him then. His eyes were calm but deeply worn, carrying the quiet exhaustion of somebody who had survived too many things to be surprised by another disappointment. Collins removed his radio from his shoulder and set it down gently on the porch railing before continuing. We came onto your property assuming the worst about you. About who you were. Elijah listened without interrupting. That should not have happened. A long silence followed. The rookie officer watched Elijah carefully, half expecting anger to finally appear after everything. But Elijah simply took another slow sip of coffee while evening light warmed the porch around him. Captain, he said quietly, I have been called worse things by better men. Collins flinched slightly at the sentence. It was not cruel. Somehow that made it harder to hear. The captain looked out toward the gathered patrol vehicles scattered across the muddy field. My deputies damaged your property. We tracked mud through your house. We treated you like, he stopped again. Elijah finished the sentence for him gently. Like a threat. Collins nodded once. The old wind chimes beside the front door moved softly in the breeze between them. Somewhere near the road, reporters continued speaking quietly into cameras while the last heavy clouds drifted east across the horizon. Elijah slowly set his coffee cup down beside the rocking chair. You know what the hardest part of getting older is? He asked. Collins looked up uncertainly. Elijah rested his large weathered hands against his knees. It is not the injuries. Not the nightmares. His eyes drifted toward the American flag hanging beside the porch. It is realizing how quickly people forget what you carried for them. Nobody moved. Even the deputies nearby seemed frozen by the quiet honesty in his voice. Elijah leaned back slightly in the chair. But I did not serve this country so strangers would clap for me. He looked toward Collins again. I served because somebody had to. The captain lowered his eyes, visibly ashamed now. After several long seconds, Elijah slowly pushed himself up from the rocking chair despite the stiffness in his knee. He stepped carefully toward the porch stairs where Collins still stood waiting. The two men faced each other in silence while evening sunlight stretched long shadows across the wet ground around them. Then Elijah extended one massive scarred hand. Colin stared at it for a moment before shaking it carefully. Elijah's grip felt strong despite the arthritis visible in his knuckles. "Just do me one favor, Captain," Elijah said softly. "Next time you see an old black man minding his business, maybe ask questions before bringing half the county onto his land." Collins nodded immediately. "Yes, sir." Elijah gave the faintest tired smile. "And somebody better check on my chickens. They've been traumatized all day." Several deputies nearby let out nervous laughter for the first time since sunrise. The tension finally broke. Even Collins managed a weak smile while shaking his head. But underneath the brief laughter, something heavier remained hanging in the evening air. Because every officer standing there understood the same truth now. The calm old farmer they judged in seconds had shown more dignity in one day than most people managed in an entire lifetime. The last patrol vehicle rolled slowly down the muddy county road just after sunset, its flashing lights fading behind rows of dark pine trees until the farm finally returned to silence. For the first time all day, no radios crackled across the property. No deputies shouted instructions. No cameras pointed toward the porch. The crowd beyond the barricades had disappeared one car at a time as evening settled over rural Alabama, leaving behind only deep tire tracks in the wet earth and scattered footprints pressed into the mud. Elijah Turner stood alone near the front fence watching the final cruiser disappear into the distance while cool evening air drifted across the pasture carrying the smell of rain-soaked grass and damp wood. The entire farm looked exhausted. The porch boards were streaked with muddy boot prints. Cabinet doors still hung open inside the house. One section of fencing near the stable leaned crooked where deputies had searched earlier that morning. Yet despite the mess left behind, the property somehow felt peaceful again. Quiet had returned. Elijah slowly walked back toward the stable with his limp more noticeable now that adrenaline and tension had faded away. The chestnut mare greeted him with a low soft sound from inside the stall while the other horses shifted gently in the straw. Elijah rested one hand against the mare's neck and closed his eyes briefly. The animal breathed calmly beneath his fingers. Outside, crickets had begun singing across the fields while the last light of sunset painted the clouds deep orange behind the trees. Near the farmhouse porch sat a small cardboard box left behind by the rookie officer before leaving. Inside were fresh groceries, 2 bags of chicken feed, and a handwritten note folded carefully on top. Elijah opened the paper slowly beneath the porch light. It read, "I am sorry for how we came here today. Thank you for your service." Elijah stared at the note for several seconds before quietly folding it again and placing it in his jacket pocket. No smile crossed his face. But something in his shoulders softened slightly. He stepped onto the porch and lowered himself carefully into the old rocking chair as darkness settled over the farm. The American flag beside the front door moved gently in the warm evening breeze, its edges still damp from the storm. Inside the house, dishes remained untouched in the sink beside muddy footprints drying slowly across the floorboards. Elijah looked around at the mess. Without frustration. He had seen worse after harder days. A distant engine suddenly approached from the road. Elijah looked up as Captain Wade Collins's truck slowly pulled back onto the property alone without lights or sirens. The truck stopped near the gate and remained idling for several quiet seconds before Collins stepped out carrying a toolbox in one hand. He looked different now without the command posture and tactical vest. Just a tired middle-aged man standing awkwardly in the fading light. Elijah watched silently as Collins walked toward the damaged fence near the stable. "Figured this should get fixed before tomorrow," the captain said quietly. Elijah said nothing at first. Collins set the toolbox down in the grass and knelt beside the broken fence post. The sounds of metal tools clicking softly against bolts filled the evening air while cicadas hummed across the darkening fields. For several minutes neither man spoke. Then finally Elijah rose slowly from the rocking chair and walked across the yard toward him. Without a word, he picked up another section of fencing and held it steady while Collins worked. The moment felt strangely simple after everything that had happened. No cameras. No radios. No uniforms surrounding the property. Just two tired men repairing damage beneath the fading sunset. My father served in Desert Storm, Colin said quietly while tightening a bolt. Elijah nodded once. Army? Yes, sir. Collins kept his eyes lowered toward the fence. He used to tell me that some of the best men he ever met came home carrying things nobody else could see. Elijah looked out toward the dark field stretching beyond the barn. Your father was right. Collins swallowed hard. I think somewhere along the way I forgot how to look at people before judging them. Elijah remained silent for a moment before answering softly. World teaches that habit early. The fence finally stood straight again. Collins brushed dirt from his hands and stepped back. The repaired wood looked rough but sturdy beneath the porch light. Not perfect, he muttered. Elijah gave a faint tired smile. Most things worth keeping usually are not. For the first time that entire day, Collins smiled back without tension behind it. The captain picked up his toolbox and walked slowly toward his truck before stopping once more near the gate. Good night, Master Chief. Elijah leaned one arm against the repaired fence while warm night wind moved softly across the pasture around him. Good night, Captain. Collins drove away quietly into the darkness, leaving Elijah alone beneath a sky slowly filling with stars. The old farmer remained standing near the fence for a long time after the truck disappeared. Somewhere in the distance, frogs croaked near flooded ditches left by the storm. Wind brushed through the trees with a soft rustling sound while the porch light glowed warmly against the farmhouse behind him. Elijah finally looked up toward the stars overhead, breathing slowly in the cool night air. No medals hung around his neck. No reporters stood nearby. No crowds applauded. Just an old black man on a quiet farm at the end of a long day, holding on to peace the same way he always had. Quietly. Without asking anyone to notice.